Hey there, welcome back to AutumnAfar, and welcome back to those of you who have joined me before. As always, any of the links that I have used as part of my research for this video are going to be in the description box below, and I highly encourage you to do your own research and form your own opinion. Today's video is about what I wish I knew before I started cruising. I, as of taping this, have been on 3 cruises. 2 were in the Caribbean, one leaving from New Orleans, Louisiana, one from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and the third was a nearly month-long cruise from Sydney to Seattle, Washington. So I've spent a pretty substantial amount of time on cruise ships, and there are quite a few things that I wish I had known before, not just because they're handy tips to have, but because the cruise industry is not necessarily what it's all cracked up to be, but we'll get into that. To make this video a little bit easier, what I've done is I've separated it into a couple different categories. The first portion is about packing. A lot of people tend to overpack when they go on cruises because they figure it's like every other vacation. The truth is, when you go on a cruise, you need way less clothes than you imagine. You really should be able to pack pretty much everything on a carry-on size bag. You really don't need all that much. So if anybody's not familiar with cruises, the way it works is like in hotels, you get a room. That's where you'll stay for the entire duration of the cruise. So you can relax and unpack if that's something you want to do, but I usually just leave my stuff in my bag. That way I know where everything is and I know I'm not leaving anything behind when I leave. So as I discussed in a previous video, I pack a lot less than people generally do, but if you're going to be staying more or less in the same place, only leaving for day tours, for a whole week or 8 to 10 days, you don't really need more than this, in my opinion, but everybody's a little bit different. So what I pack are 7 shirts, so 1 for each day, 3 pairs of pants, 2 pairs of shorts, maybe a skirt. I usually bring a couple of dresses for formal nights and to take pictures, 2 bathing suits, pair of jogging pants, pair of leggings. Usually I'll take a couple little mini shampoo and conditioners because the one soap that they generally have on the cruise ship is really not great for my skin and for my hair. It makes it very dry, so I don't like to use that soap unless I absolutely have to. Personally, I like to bring a towel, but you don't have to. They are provided on the cruise ship, but if you lose one, they will charge you, and it's usually way more than you would expect to pay for a towel. I also bring skin creams or lotions with me, and as always, I buy my sunscreen at location so that it's up to the regulatory standards of that area in case they have specific chemicals they don't want included that might harm the wildlife or the coral reefs. I'll also usually bring flip-flops, running shoes, socks, underwear, bras, a few pieces of jewelry, a pair of high heels because I always travel with high heels, a scarf, a small handbag or backpack for day trips. If you're not sure how you're going to do on a cruise, personally, even though I've been on a few now, I still bring either seasickness patches or pills, or I have these little bracelets that have like a little pressure point on it that are supposed to stop you from feeling sick. But despite having crossed the Pacific Ocean, the only bad weather we had during that cruise was when we got to Hawaii, but the worst seasickness I ever had was leaving Fort Lauderdale, but apparently we were behind some massive storm, so that probably explains it. But I've heard a lot of people say that leaving through Fort Lauderdale is some of the worst water to leave through because they don't have anything protecting them, so who knows. Once you've got everything packed and you're all booked and ready to go, one of the most important things that you do is boarding. Depending on the port that you're leaving from, the boarding process can be really long or it could be really quick and painless. One of the best experiences I've had with boarding had to be at the Sydney Harbour port. Everything was very quick, it was very well organized. You could tell that they do this really often and that they are a very well-oiled machine and the people are used to this. The port in New Orleans was also really fantastic, but the line was a little bit longer and it was a smaller, more cramped space. The absolute worst had to have been Fort Lauderdale. It was such a nightmare, it was such a mess, and it's literally, the port at Fort Lauderdale that I left from is like in the middle of a shipping yard. It was very, very strange. Just in general, my experience with Florida has not been great. Most of the fact that everything went so well in Sydney and New Orleans was the fact that both of these ports were accessible by street. For Sydney, I actually walked from my hotel to the port. It's the reason we picked that hotel. And for New Orleans, we had a shuttle bring us, but we very easily could have walked to the port with our bags. Sydney and New Orleans also had us stand and wait inside and had staff checking in on us on a pretty regular basis to make sure we had everything we needed and that everything was ready to go. Whereas in Fort Lauderdale, everybody was standing outside and then they were in this little tin roofed structure, and it was very, very long in Fort Lauderdale. No matter where you're getting on your cruise, the boarding process starts with dropping off your luggage, which will be checked for prohibited items like alcohol, and the bags will be brought directly to your door. Usually, depending on what time you leave at, it'll be there by around supper time, which if you're leaving at noon could be, 6 hours. So if you really need anything in your bag, bring it with you. It is not instantaneous. They bring all the bags on, and then once they've left the port, then they bring all the bags up through staff stairways that are private and you cannot access. You have to keep in mind that they are sometimes working with 12 or 14,000 people's luggage that they have to bring to them pretty much one at a time. So while you're off exploring the ship and having a good time, they're working to bring your bags to you and to make sure that everything runs properly. Once you've dropped off your bag, it's time to get in line for check-in and security. This is the point where you will have your photo taken for your cruise card, which is an identification card that they scan when you get on and get off the cruise ship so that they know if anybody is missing from a port. And it's also how they charge you for different purchases either on the ship or through your room. And it's at this point where you will also give your credit card information to link to these cards. You usually have to put a minimum amount on there. They don't usually allow you to just not link a credit card in my experience, just because they want everybody to use the cruise cards, which will then be charged to your credit card, so people don't have to take your card information in a non-secure way while you're on the cruise. They also don't accept cash on most cruises from what I've seen. You might be able to tip in cash, but I don't believe you're able to pay for drinks or anything like that in cash either, because they don't have change. If anybody is going to be traveling with kids and they're worried that the kids might spend too much, you can put a limit on. When we first went on our cruise, we had a limit of, I think it was like $15 or $20, and after that you wouldn't be able to spend anymore because there was nothing preloaded onto the card. If we didn't spend that money, it went back to our credit card that was on the file. You're also able to, at least with Royal Caribbean, one of the cruise lines that I traveled with, you're able to see in your room on the TV how much is being spent by what person and what they spent it on. And many cruise lines now have that capability on the applications they have as well. Once you're checked in and through security comes the actual boarding. This can take quite a bit of time, not because people are having trouble finding their rooms, but because there are photos taken of you when you get on the ship. Professional photos with backdrops, and I'm really happy my mom had been on cruises before and my cousins had actually honeymooned on a cruise, because otherwise nobody probably would have told us that they do pictures. And I know it seems a little bit ridiculous considering all that I've just told you about how long it can be, but dress up, look a little bit nice, do your hair, do your makeup, because the pictures of when you first get on the cruise can be some of the best, because everybody's really happy. It's the beginning of your vacation. Everyone's in a good mood for the most part. So it's really something that can be a fantastic souvenir. And these pop up just about every time you get off the ship as well. So every time you get off, I always go and they scan your cruise card and they take your picture and they send it through your account, and you're able to purchase either the photos individually or you could purchase a package, which is what we usually do, and we get all of the pictures for one set price. So when we went on the cruise through Sydney, it was like probably over 1,000 pictures, because we would go every single night. We would take pictures. We took pictures with the staff members. We took pictures with all kinds of different stuff. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoy the picture portion, at least of the cruise. Once you've gone through, you've checked in, you've boarded, you're ready to go. This is the most significant part of your cruise. Not the sail away party, but the muster drill. Before every cruise ship leaves port, they must legally do a muster drill. You cannot skip the muster drill. Point blank, period. If you're not there, they will come looking for you, and you are holding everyone else up. The reason they do muster drills is because where you end up going, the deck you end up going onto, is where you will go in case of an emergency. If something should happen, that is where you will go to get into your lifeboat. They also explain to you where you will find the life vests and how you're able to get off, and where you're going, what's going to happen if you should need to get into the lifeboat for any reason. Generally, it takes about 30 minutes when everybody is organized and everybody shows up on time. But when people don't show up, or when people need to wait for the elevator, it can take a lot longer. So just get there. If you're able to, take the stairs and make everyone's life easy, because I can only imagine running after people who've gone down for a nap or who have, you know, tried to start shopping or eating early. Can't be fun for the staff members. If you've got small children or people who don't like loud noises, the muster drills can get really loud. Some find the muster drill really loud, so you can block your ears. The muster drill consists of 7 short blasts and 1 long blast of the horn. As far as my research has shown, the practice of doing a muster drill consistently happened after the crash of the Costa Concordia. Costa Concordia's survivors said that they had not been told where to find the lifeboats. The reason it takes 30 minutes is because that's generally how long it should take to get everybody into the lifeboats should a disaster occur. After the muster drill is completed, almost every cruise line has a sail away party, which consists of music and dancing and partying, and people will go up onto the decks and wave to the people on the shore, which people generally kind of hang out and wave goodbye to the people on cruise ships, which is a lot of fun. If you don't want to watch the land fade away slowly, generally I'll go up to the spa or another area, because they usually do a lot of different giveaways and raffles and things of that nature, sales and other events on the ship, because they're only available for the first day of the cruise, and sometimes it's only available for the first couple hours. So once the muster drill is complete and you sail away from the shore, this is when the fun begins. Depending on the cruise line and the class of ship you're on, even individual ships and activities may vary. For example, Carnival is really well known for their water slides. They've got self-propelled roller coasters on a couple of their ships, and they've also got a new robot bartender. Royal Caribbean, on the other hand, has mini putt, rock climbing, skydiving simulators, surf simulators, and an extendable arm that'll bring you over the side of the ship, which is really cool. And Royal also has a zip line through the middle of the vessel, which goes over walkways and flies by the interior rooms that have windows, which is really neat and also kind of scary. So if you're not expecting it, all of a sudden someone goes whipping by your room, it's a little bit strange, but it also sounds really cool. Royal also have diving performers who dive into pools of water from 30 feet high. Not all ships have the same activities, and some things might be down occasionally for maintenance or because they don't have an operator or things of that nature. So that's something to take into consideration as well. So another big aspect of cruising, at least for me, because I'm not somebody who likes to just sit on the ship, is excursions. Some people go on cruises for the excursions. Some people would rather just stay on the ship and hang out. You can stay on the ship if you want. Food is still provided. There's still stuff going on, though the shops and casinos close because they're in the territories of specific countries, not in international waters. So basically anything that isn't food related pretty much closes when you reach a country. So if you wanted to do anything else, you would have to usually get off the ship. If you hear any heavy breathing, it's probably because my dog has decided she wants to come up and join me. So she's sitting here right next to me. She's not going to sit up so you won't be able to see her. But she's here. Hang on. I'm just going to move the tripod. Hang on. Oh my god. Okay. Oh, there goes my lip. Oh, Nikki. Oh, your face is under the table. What are you doing? What's going on, puppy? We have a little guest star today. Okay, so back to what I was saying before. So each destination has different types of excursions. Most usually have trips into town. They have historical tours. They have food and wine tours depending on the area. And they also usually have fishing tours. I've also obviously gone on scuba diving tours, and one of my favorites was when we were in Puerto Rico, we went ziplining, which was really, really fantastic. And in Haiti, we also got to go parasailing, which was not as fun as I expected it to be, honestly. I expected it to be a little bit more exciting, but you're basically in a swing in the sky, floating. It's not a whole lot of anything, but it's still pretty cool. So some people feel safe enough to purchase tours when they arrive at destination and buy cash directly with locals. I'm someone who would much rather purchase through the cruise company, because if you don't like the cruise tour, you're very likely to get a refund. And this actually happened at one point when we went on a tour, I think it was in Hawaii, where it was nowhere near what we expected it to be, and pretty much everybody else on the tour felt the exact same. If I remember correctly, we didn't end up going to about half of the places we were supposed to because it was a Sunday and they were all closed, and nowhere was that ever mentioned, either by the cruise line or by the tour provider. They just kind of skipped over different things, and it wasn't until people said, hey, we were supposed to go there, that we kind of realized that we were getting gypped a little bit for what we spent. The other thing is that purchasing through the cruise line means that the cruise line knows where you are. It's been a hard day for somebody. My goodness. Purchasing through the cruise line means that you will not get left behind. There was a case, I think a year or two ago, with a young couple who were on a cruise and they didn't make it back on time, and the cruise ship left without them, and they kind of went viral for trying to convince the cruise ship to come back, and the employees were just kind of standing there like, nope, not gonna happen. The cruise ship will not wait for you. They've got places to go, they've got a set time to leave, and you need to be back. Personally, while I was in, I believe it was Grand Cayman, there were taxis driving around up and down the streets calling out to different people because they were missing the all aboard time, and they actually did this for like an hour and a half, if not longer, calling out the name of the cruise ship because they were planning to leave and still didn't have people. It got to the point where they were calling out people's specific names, and I honestly don't know if those people ever made it to their ship. I hope they did. But if you had to drive around for over an hour and a half with various taxi drivers trying to get them back, it's pretty ridiculous. We did come close twice on my first two cruises when I was with my family, my parents and my sister, that we almost missed the cruise ship, and thankfully, because I'm smart and I look at these things in advance, my parents didn't realize how far away we were from the ship when we were in Mexico, and we ended up having to take a taxi to get back on time because they thought the ship was a lot closer, but it was actually a Disney ship, not the Royal Caribbean ship we were on. And the other time was in Puerto Rico because we got held up when we were making purchases because there was a long line and there were a lot of transactions to do. So we almost missed the cruise ship then. Thankfully we made it back, and we were not the last people, and we made it back with about 15 minutes to spare in both cases. So try not to cut it too close. It really is very nerve-wracking. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was the crew of the ship. On all of the ships I've been on, there have always been some incredibly kind, just fantastic people on the cruise ship who really know what they're doing, they really know their jobs, and they really seem to enjoy their jobs for the most part. Different people obviously have different jobs, but they're all trained in safety precautions for obvious reasons. There are also quite a few cruise lines now who train their staff in various ways. When I was on my first cruise with Royal Caribbean, the one that left from New Orleans, that's when I found out that Royal Caribbean was the first cruise line in the world to have their employees become autism friendly. They were in the process of doing that when I went in 2013, and they got the certification in February of 2014. So I've cruised both as a minor and as an adult. My first cruise from New Orleans was much better than my one from Fort Lauderdale. I'm still friends with about 5 or 6 of the people that I cruised with back in 2013, but I haven't really kept in touch with most of the people I met in 2014, with the exception of 1 or 2 through Facebook. As an adult, I actually bonded with the staff pretty quickly when I left from Sydney. They were the only people really on the ship that were my age, and I actually got confused for a cruise member a couple of times because I was so young and the cruise was mostly retirees, because not many other people have 25 or so days to cruise from Sydney to Seattle and they also weren't expecting a young person to be doing something like that. I also made friends with about a half dozen or so of the cruisers, many of whom I still keep in contact with. So Nikki, Mary, and Brandon, if you're watching this, hi! Hi Mia, I miss you. And I keep in touch with them on a pretty regular basis through social media, despite the fact that 2 of them live in Australia and we're in different time zones, and the other lives in, I think it's Colorado, and is also obviously in a different time zone, but still on my continent. So the last thing, some people, some dogs, honestly. The last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about for this was disembarking. So if you plan to sleep in a little bit and have a leisurely breakfast, this might not necessarily be something that you need to be concerned about. But if you have a flight to catch like I usually do, this is probably one of the most important portions, other than making it back in time before your cruise leaves. Unless you plan to bring your bags out and off of the ship yourself, your luggage needs to be outside your door the night before arrival. This time will vary from cruise ship to cruise ship depending on what they need and how many bags they have, but usually it is before or at dinner time. So much like the baggage was dropped off at your room, it'll be picked up from the outside of your room the night before you arrive, and it will be waiting in the same type of area when you get off the ship. Usually they're on the floor in, you know, various areas, standing up with your information, and you'll be directed to where to grab your bags from, similarly to when you drop them off. Before you go to bed, I really highly suggest that you do a sweep of every drawer, every cabinet, anywhere you put things or could have put things. Check it and see to make sure there's nothing that's been left anywhere outside of your line of sight. If something is on a desk or on a nightstand or on a counter, usually that's fine because you'll see it. But if it's in somewhere, usually you won't, and you may possibly forget it. And it makes it way easier to make sure that you've done this the night before so that you can just leave the next day as well. If possible, one of my kind of pro tips for this is pack everything except the things that you need for the next day. So the only things you should have before you put your baggage out the night before should be your clothing for the next day, your passport and documentation, and any electronics that you don't want being left in the storage overnight. So you will be given a meeting point, usually the night before, where you will bring any remaining bags and you will sit and wait. Usually it's an auditorium of some kind. I've waited in a theater, I've waited in the ice skating rink. There have been times where I waited at bars. Then you'll sit there and wait for your designated spot, and they will call you at a designated time to let you off the ship so that it's done in a little bit more of an orderly fashion. If you come after your specified time, like if you decide to get up late and go have breakfast and wander around the ship for a little bit longer, usually it doesn't make a big difference, but there are times where the cruise ship will say, no, you need to wait for such and such a time to be able to get off. Everybody has different procedures, so just be aware of that. Many times a tour with an airport transfer is available. Sometimes it's just the airport transfer. So you may choose to book that instead of a taxi. Some also offer tours of the city depending on what time the tour ends at and what time your flight may be at. That might be a better option instead of just sitting and waiting at the airport. I know that's what I ended up doing in Seattle because we had a really long time between what time our cruise arrived at and what time the flight was available at, so that we ended up unfortunately missing the first available flight, and I had to wait until late that afternoon, early in the evening I believe it was, because it was a red eye. Yeah, that sucked. For these I would definitely call the cruise line and see what they say, because they'll be able to ensure you have enough time between arrival at your port and check-in at the airport to make sure that you get there in time and that you won't be told that you've missed your flight or your check-in time. This is everything else. I'm going to go through these really quickly. So extra charges. The price of your cruise does not include your gratuities. It does not include your drinks, either soda or alcoholic. nor does it include any specialty dining. So you're going literally just in the dining rooms and the buffet that they have available to everybody. Everything else is extra. I would really strongly recommend paying your gratuities in advance, because that means that your tips or gratuities are paid in your currency, not in USD, which is what most of the currency is by default for most of the cruises that I've been on. And it also means that you don't have to worry about paying them at the end of your cruise. For some of the cruise workers, most of their wage is the gratuity that we pay. I don't agree with the practice. I think that it's absolutely wrong, but we always make sure to pay them in advance. And I've also heard that there are some people who will pay them and then remove them, and that ends up being that those people really basically don't get paid, which is atrocious. And if you're doing that, I would love to have a conversation with you and find out why, because that just doesn't make any sense to me. For the drinks, the first 3 cruises that I've done, you spend anywhere from $13 to $16 a day worth of soda, and it's like $89 a day for a deluxe drink package that cruise lines are now cracking down on, because they have these special mugs that have a little sensor at the bottom of them in the souvenir cups that you get, and they have to be switched out every 2 weeks, which is what happened during my Trans-Pacific cruise with Royal from Sydney to Seattle, is that all of a sudden our drink cups didn't work, and they said, oh, you have to get a new one because it's been 2 weeks, which doesn't really make much sense. They should be able to program them, but that's another problem. Another thing that I spoke on briefly was seasickness. I've only ever gotten seasick on one cruise, the one leaving out of Fort Lauderdale, which is apparently more common when you leave out of Fort Lauderdale. When I did end up getting seasick, a lot of people got seasick, and they had bags out. They were telling people to go and see the doctor if they felt they needed to. There are pills and other remedies you can try. They're available on board at a markup, so if you can, buy them in advance at your local pharmacy or buy them at a pharmacy near the cruise port, because they almost always have them, and they're a lot less expensive on land than they are when you're on the ship. Onboard credits. When you book, oftentimes you will have an exclusive deal where you'll get an onboard credit on your sea card, on your cruise card, that you can use on board for merchandise, for spa services, for specialty dining, for excursions. I would advise at the very least to know what your onboard credit is in advance and what you're able to put it towards, because some of them are for specific things. They usually start around $50 per passenger. I have seen them go as high as $300 or $400 per person, depending on when you're traveling, how many people are going, and what kind of room you're in. Flights. As a former travel agent, I feel it is my job to ask you, at the very least, to speak to the cruise line if you are planning to fly in or out on the very same day of your cruise. Depending on your time of arrival or time of departure, you might have a ton of time to hang out or take a tour, or there might be only one flight out on that day, and if you don't catch it, you might be stuck there for another few days or a week. Typically, before I take a cruise, leaving from Canada, I like to spend at least one day in the city I'm arriving in before, specifically because when I leave from different places, very often, especially in the winter, we have to de-ice the plane, and that takes time. And I've had friends miss flights and all kinds of other stuff because of snowstorms, or because the line was really long and they missed a connecting flight, and it can get very, very difficult. I also usually like to leave the same day my cruise arrives in port, because usually by then I'm pretty much done with the sun and the sand and the beach, and I just kind of want to go home. And this is very difficult because your docking time is not the time you disembark at. When my cruise ships would dock, it would sometimes be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and while people might be able to get off the ship at that time, if they really, really, really need to for some unknown reason, generally speaking, people will stay on until 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you need to have at least 2 hours after you dock, 3 hours before your flight. So that's a total of 5 hours to be able to get through security, get through your gate, so keep that in mind. If you're planning on booking your flights separately from your cruise, The cruise line also often has deals because they book in high volumes. So always check and see if they're able to get you even a slightly better deal, because that way they're able to tell you, if the cruise ship is late or something like that. Often they're able to fix something up with the airline. Just look into it is all I'm saying. Another thing that is a very, very hot topic at the moment, as I'm sure you can imagine. Well, actually two things. Number one is quarantine. A word that none of us really want to hear anymore because we're all pretty fed up of it. But yes, people, as we all know now, people get sick on cruise ships. It's not uncommon for people to be quarantined. I believe when I was on a cruise ship, someone was quarantined and there was this yellow tape across the door and you weren't allowed in or out. The room was locked and they were brought food and they weren't allowed to leave. I don't know if they had doctors go and check on them. I don't know if they ended up leaving at another port, but they were not allowed to leave that room. The cruise line reserves the right to keep crew and all passengers safe by putting someone into quarantine in their stateroom. I've also seen people leave after being injured. There was one person at the very least, I believe, from one of my cruise ships who was airlifted by helicopter. There was someone else who was brought out on a stretcher because they had broken their leg or something of that nature. There are also people who have been kicked off ships for bad behavior. There was a guy a couple years ago who, for some unknown reason, decided to jump off the balcony of his stateroom into the ocean over, it was 8 or 10 stories or something stupid like that into the water. And he very easily could have gotten himself seriously injured or killed, because from that height to go down, he very easily could have either knocked himself out or hit the bottom and he would have drowned. But he's lucky. He survived, but he's been banned from pretty much every major cruise line in the world for life. Which leads me to another one, dying on a cruise. Unfortunately, some people do occasionally die at sea. It's not just the horrible stories you hear about falling to their deaths or people falling overboard in the middle of the night. Many people die on specific cruises. I've heard a lot of terrible stories about cruises to Alaska, where many seniors go when they feel that their time is ending or when they don't want to be around anymore. I've heard horror stories from crew members who found the remains of passengers who either went by choice or went naturally. Many cruise ships built recently have not just medical bays, but they also have morgues and cold storage so that they can keep the remains of the decedent, the passenger, so that they can be brought back to their family at the next port or when they return to their original port of departure. Oftentimes there are so many people on board, you may not know that someone has passed away unless you know them personally or unless you saw something happen. So a couple more things, we're almost done. I know this is very long. Thank you for sticking with me. If you're still here, you are so fantastic. If you're still here, drop a pineapple in the comments so I can give you a 5-star review or something. I don't know. Cruise newsletters. Oh my god, dog. Why? Thank you. Cruise newsletters. Every day you will very likely receive a newsletter delivered directly to your room at night by your stateroom attendant. This will tell you all the things like the docking times, the sail away times, the activities that are available on board, possibly what kind of entertainment will be available, any movies that might be playing, if they're going to be doing ice skating shows or things of that nature, as well as information on the cruise port that you will be going into. I personally keep mine and I end up scanning them and keeping them digitally so that I know what I did on each day. So another one, breakfast, the dining hall versus the buffet. Almost anytime I travel, I usually get up early. Cruises usually are the exception. Depending on the cruise line, breakfast usually starts around 6 o'clock in the morning at the proper dining room, and they stay open until about 10. The dining room offers the full service experience with menus, but you can also do a custom order if you don't see something that you like on the menu. My mom loves going to the dining hall because she gets to meet and talk to new people every day, because they sit people at different tables because it's not assigned seating like it is for dinner. I usually just go to the buffet and grab a box of cereal and a thing of milk and head up to my room and hang out there for a bit. The late nights at the onboard club can make for rough mornings, I'll be honest. One last thing that I have as a recommendation, a lot of you have probably seen it, but Hassan Minhaj has a show called Patriot Act, and either last season or the season before, he did an episode about the cruise industry. I really highly recommend it. It was beautifully done. It talks about the real cost of the cruise industry in a pretty funny way. I really love Hassan's comedy and the way that they did the episode, so I'll link that below for the YouTube link. If you can't see it, try using a VPN. I know it might be blocked in some places, but give it a shot. Oh, so I know that was long. Thank you so much for joining me today. Oh, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for sticking with me if you're still here. If you have any questions about this topic or suggestions for future videos, drop a comment down below. You can connect with me on all my social media. It's at AutumnAfar. And remember, your comfort zone can be a really great place, but nothing ever grows there. I'll see you next time.